Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, also known as Elizabeth, gave new meaning, or should we say, expanded meaning, to the word bloodbath. The word's classic definition of a savage, indiscriminate massacre applies to Elizabeth, since she would regularly order dozens of young girls, usually virgins, tortured and killed. The word's expanded meaning comes from what she would then do with these slaughtered innocents. She would have their bodies drained of blood, and when she had enough to immerse herself in, she would take long, luxurious baths in the blood, believing that this gave her renewed youth and made her skin glow with health. Elizabeth's belief in the rejuvenating powers of female blood came after an incident in which she was having her hair combed by a servant girl, and the girl accidentally pulled Elizabeth's hair too hard and caused her pain. Elizabeth struck the girl in the nose with such force that the girl's nose began spouting blood, some of which splashed onto Elizabeth's face and arm. When Elizabeth wiped off the blood, she suddenly believed that she saw smoother, more radiant, younger skin. She, of course, did not, but her delusional belief that the blood had made her skin look younger was the impetus for her to begin bathing in the blood of virgins. Some historians claim that the servant's nosebleed story was embellished to come up with the story of Elizabeth bathing in blood. But if it is true that she found rejuvenative powers in a simple splash of blood, one could easily believe that she would wonder what a lot would do. It wasn't bad enough that Elizabeth began rounding up young virgins from the surrounding towns, often on the pretext of offering them a servant's job, and then torturing and killing them for their blood. Sometimes she would imprison girls and have them feed constantly, believing that the fatter the girl, the more blood she would eventually be able to harvest. The truly evil nature of Bathory's personality manifested itself in what she would do to these poor girls before she killed them, and drained their blood for her satanic rituals and cosmetic uses. Elizabeth had an underground room outfitted in the depths of her castle that became known as Her Ladyship's torture chamber. She would bring her servant girls and village girls there regularly, ostensibly to train them or punish them for making a mistake while carrying out a task or forgetting to complete a chore. But in reality, it would be to cruelly torture them for her own pleasure before killing and exsanguinating them. Elizabeth was especially inventive when it came to concocting ways of inflicting torment on her victims. She greatly enjoyed sticking needles through the nipples and lips of her captives. She also delighted in ramming pins under the girls' fingernails and toenails, and laughing as they screamed in agony. Slow tortures were her specialty. Records show that she would sometimes have a girl stripped naked, smeared with honey, and then tied up and left in the woods where animals and insects would devour her alive. Sometimes, she would have a naked girl placed in a steel cage that would be suspended from the ceiling. Inside the cage were protruding razor-sharp spikes surrounding the victim, and Elizabeth would have her lackeys poke the girl from beneath with red-hot irons and swords. As the trapped girl tried to evade the stabbings, she would cut and sometimes impale herself on the teeth of the cage. Once, Elizabeth bit off a huge chunk of a girl's flesh, then made the virgin cook the piece of her own body and eat it. Elizabeth would carry out anything her twisted mind could conjure up. She would insert lighted candles up young girls' vaginas, and she would use branding irons and sharpened pincers to burn and shred the doomed girls' bodies. She delighted in anything that would degrade a female, especially a young, virginal female. She also greatly enjoyed using her mouth to bite off parts of their bodies and then drink the flowing blood. She was often seen with blood smeared all over her face and mouth. Elizabeth was served well by a coterie of demons, including witches, a dwarf, and her nurses. Elizabeth Bathory was not called the Blood Countess of Transylvania for nothing. In fact, many historians believe that Countess Elizabeth Bathory's deeds may have been additional inspiration, along, of course, with the history of Vlad Dracula the Impaler, for Bram Stoker's literary Count Dracula. Elizabeth came from a royal Hungarian family whose crest was the Order of the Dragon, as was Vlad Dracula's. There was also a great amount of inbreeding in Elizabeth's family, and many believe this contributed to her deviltry. Elizabeth was stunningly beautiful. She had long, shiny black hair, alabaster skin, soft brown eyes, and a voluptuous and sensuous body. She was also a lesbian with a taste for the perverted aspects of sadomasochistic sex, taught to her by her favorite aunts, who were also lesbians and sadists. Elizabeth was married by contract at the age of 15, but her husband kept a low profile and tried to stay away from the castle as much as possible. With the count gone, the fiendish Elizabeth was able to indulge her worst impulses and sadistic tendencies. Elizabeth was caught in the middle of a bloody orgy of sex and torture in 1610 by a neighboring count who was given the task of investigating the disappearances of so many nubile young ladies from the area. Elizabeth's accomplices, many of whom participated in the horrors because they would be subjected to the same treatment if they disobeyed her, were found guilty, tortured mercilessly in front of the townsfolk, and executed by beheading. 2 of her confederates, the witches Ilona Jo and Dorota Sentes, suffered extremely terrible fates. Their fingers were pulled off one by one, and they were burned alive. Elizabeth was sentenced to a life in prison and died in her cell from unknown causes in 1614 at the age of 54. It is estimated that she was responsible for the tortured deaths of more than 650 young women.